They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood can poison everything it touches. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I'm about to share a story that will shake you to your core, because sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who'll throw you away like yesterday's garbage when you need them most. Picture this: an 18-year-old girl standing on a doorstep with nothing but a duffel bag and $17 in her pocket, watching the only home she'd ever known disappear behind a slammed door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That girl was me, and that moment changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and what it means to survive when the world turns its back on you. Now let me take you back to where it all began, because understanding my story means understanding the foundation that crumbled beneath my feet long before that door ever closed. I grew up in Millbrook, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and keeping up appearances mattered more than keeping your family together. My parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, owned Martinez Auto Repair, a business that had been in our family for 3 generations. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American dream family. Dad was the hardworking entrepreneur, Mom was the supportive wife who managed the books, and I was their only daughter, the one who was supposed to carry on the family legacy. But behind closed doors, perfection had a price that I started paying long before I even understood what was happening. My childhood wasn't filled with the typical memories most kids cherish. While other families went on vacations or spent weekends at the park, I was learning how to calculate profit margins and inventory costs. By the time I was 12, I could balance a checkbook better than most adults. By 14, I was managing customer appointments and handling supplier negotiations. My parents called it preparing me for the real world, but looking back, I realize I was just free labor wrapped up in the pretty bow of family responsibility. School was my escape, the one place where I could be Jessica the student instead of Jessica the unpaid employee. I excelled in everything I touched, especially mathematics and business studies. My teachers constantly praised my analytical mind and my ability to see patterns others missed. I dreamed of college, of studying business administration at a real university, maybe even getting my MBA someday. I had this vision of coming back to expand our little auto shop into something bigger, maybe even franchising it across the state. But dreams, I learned, are luxuries that some families can't afford to indulge. The first crack in my perfect family facade appeared during my junior year of high school. I was 17, buried in college applications and scholarship essays, when I overheard a conversation that would haunt me for years to come. I had come home early from school, due to a canceled class, and heard my parents talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. "She's getting too independent," my mother was saying, her voice carrying that edge it got when she was worried about something. "All this college talk is putting ideas in her head." "The business needs her, Linda," my father replied, and I could hear the familiar stress in his voice that appeared whenever money was tight. "She knows our systems better than anyone we could hire. Training someone new would cost us months, maybe even customers. But what if she leaves? What if she gets into one of those fancy schools she keeps talking about?" There was a long pause, and then my father's voice dropped to a whisper that I had to strain to hear. "Then we make sure she understands where her loyalties should lie. Family comes first, always. She'll understand that when the time comes." I remember standing there in our hallway, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. This wasn't a conversation about my future or my dreams. This was a conversation about how to keep me trapped. That night, I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd had with my parents over the past few years. Suddenly, things that had seemed like normal parental guidance took on a different meaning. The way they dismissed my college counselor's recommendations for out-of-state schools. How they always seemed to schedule extra work for me whenever I mentioned college visits or scholarship deadlines. The subtle comments about how family businesses were more reliable than corporate jobs, how staying close to home was safer than venturing into the unknown. I realized I wasn't being prepared for success. I was being groomed for dependence. But I was 17 and still believed that love could overcome anything. I convinced myself that my parents just needed time to adjust to the idea of me leaving. I threw myself into my applications with renewed determination, spending late nights crafting essays and perfecting my standardized test scores. I applied to 12 universities, including several with full-ride scholarship programs that would make my education cost nothing. The acceptance letters started arriving in March of my senior year. One by one, they accumulated on my desk like golden tickets to freedom. State universities, private colleges, even an Ivy League school that offered me a partial scholarship. Each envelope represented a different version of my future, a different path away from the life that had been planned for me without my consent. I remember the day I got my dream acceptance letter. It was from Northwestern University, offering me a full academic scholarship to their business program. I held that letter in my hands and felt like I could fly. This was it, my ticket to everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed about since I was a little girl calculating profits in the back room of our shop. I ran into the house, practically bouncing with excitement, ready to share the best news of my life with the two people who were supposed to love me most. "Mom, Dad, you're never going to believe this," I called out, waving the letter above my head like a victory flag. They were in the living room, my father in his usual recliner with the newspaper, my mother folding laundry on the couch. The moment I started reading the acceptance letter aloud, I watched their faces change. Joy should have been the natural reaction, pride should have filled their eyes. Instead, I saw something that chilled me to the bone: disappointment. "Northwestern," my mother said, her voice flat. "That's in Illinois, Jessica. That's halfway across the country." "It's one of the best business schools in the nation," I replied, trying to recapture some of my initial excitement. "And it's a full scholarship, which means it won't cost us anything. I could get my degree and then come back and really help grow the business. Imagine what we could accomplish with that kind of education behind us." My father set down his newspaper and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger exactly, but it wasn't love either. It was cold calculation, the same look he got when he was evaluating whether a car was worth fixing or should be sold for parts. "Jessica, sit down," he said, patting the arm of the couch next to my mother. "We need to have a serious conversation." I sat, still clutching my acceptance letter, feeling the first stirrings of anxiety in my stomach. "We've been talking about this college situation," my mother began, her hands folded neatly in her lap, "and we've decided that it's not the right path for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean it's not the right path? This is everything I've worked for. This is my future." "Your future is here," my father said firmly. "The business is your inheritance, Jessica. It's your legacy. We've spent 18 years preparing you for this responsibility, and now you want to throw it all away for some fantasy about corporate America." "It's not a fantasy," I protested, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "It's an education. It's a chance to learn skills that could benefit our family business. I could come back with knowledge about marketing, expansion, management techniques that could double or triple our revenue. Or you could get filled with fancy ideas and decide you're too good for us," my mother replied, and there it was, the fear I'd heard in her voice that day. I'd overheard their conversation. "We've seen it happen, Jessica. Kids go off to college and come back thinking they know better than their parents. They get ashamed of where they came from." "That would never happen," I said desperately. "You're my family. This place is my home. I just want to get an education so I can be better equipped to help us succeed." But even as I said the words, I could see they weren't listening. Their minds were already made up, probably had been made up long before this conversation ever started. "We're not paying for college," my father announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If you want to continue your education, you can take some business classes at the community college while you work full-time at the shop. That's a reasonable compromise. But I have a full scholarship," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "It won't cost you anything. I can work summers and breaks to cover my living expenses." "It'll cost us your labor," my mother said bluntly. "It'll cost us 4 years of having someone else run our business who doesn't have the same investment in its success. It'll cost us the risk of losing you permanently to some big city lifestyle that we can't compete with." The truth of their position hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't about money or practicality, or even concern for my well-being. This was about control. This was about ensuring that their unpaid employee, their perfectly trained business manager, their retirement plan, never had the opportunity to choose a different life. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "My dreams, my goals, my future, none of that matters." "Your future is secure," my father replied. "The business will be yours someday. You'll have financial stability, a guaranteed income, respect in the community. Most kids would kill for that kind of security." "But I don't want just security," I said, feeling tears burning behind my eyes. "I want to achieve something. I want to build something beyond what already exists. I want to prove that I can succeed on my own merit, not just because I inherited something." "That's selfish thinking, Jessica," my mother said, shaking her head sadly. "Family comes first, always. That's how we built what we have, and that's how we'll maintain it. Your individual desires have to take second place to the good of the family." I looked at these two people who had raised me, fed me, clothed me, and suddenly felt like I was staring at strangers. The unconditional love I had believed in my entire life had conditions after all, and those conditions were my complete compliance with their vision of my future. "What if I go anyway?" I asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes without a single word being spoken. Finally, my father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "Then you'll go without our support. Financial, emotional, or otherwise. If you choose to abandon your family and your responsibilities for some selfish dream, then you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice." "You're talking about disowning me," I said, the reality of their threat sinking in like ice water in my veins. "We're talking about you making a choice," my mother corrected. "Stay and be part of this family, or leave and discover what life is like when you don't have anyone to depend on." I spent the next 3 weeks in a state of constant internal turmoil. Every morning I would wake up hoping that my parents would change their minds, that they would realize they were asking me to sacrifice my future for their comfort. Every evening I would go to bed disappointed, having spent another day watching them act as if nothing had changed while I felt like my world was crumbling around me. I tried reasoning with them. I presented business cases showing how my degree could benefit our company. I offered compromises like attending a local university and commuting from home. I even suggested taking a gap year to work in the business while applying for deferred admission. Nothing worked. They had drawn their line in the sand, and they expected me to stay on their side of it. My high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, noticed my distress during a routine check-in about graduation plans. "Jessica, you seem troubled lately," she said one afternoon, as I sat in her office, staring blankly at college brochures that felt more like torture devices than opportunities. "Is everything all right with your college plans?" For a moment I considered lying, pretending everything was fine, maintaining the facade that had become second nature in our household. But I was 18 years old, exhausted from carrying secrets, and desperate for someone to validate that I wasn't crazy for wanting more than what I'd been offered. "My parents won't let me go to college," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "They want me to work in the family business instead." Mrs. Patterson leaned back in her chair, studying my face carefully. "When you say they won't let you, do you mean they won't pay for it?" "I have a full scholarship to Northwestern," I replied. "They're saying if I accept it, they'll cut me off completely." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "No financial support, no contact, nothing. I see," she said slowly. "Jessica, you're 18 years old. Legally your parents can't prevent you from attending college, but they also aren't obligated to support your decision. Have you considered what accepting that scholarship would really mean for your relationship with your family?" "Every day," I admitted. "But Mrs. Patterson, what kind of relationship requires me to give up my dreams to maintain it? What kind of love comes with conditions like that?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her words carefully. Finally, she pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "There are resources available for students in your situation," she said. "Financial aid options for students who are estranged from their families, work-study programs, emergency housing assistance. It won't be easy, but it's possible to make it work if you're determined enough." She handed me the list she'd been writing, and I stared at it like it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. But Jessica, she continued, her voice gentle but serious, you need to understand that this decision will change everything. Once you cross this line, there may not be a way back. You need to be absolutely certain that you're prepared for that possibility. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my backpack. How do I know if I'm making the right choice? Ask yourself this, she said. In 10 years, which decision will you regret more? The opportunities you didn't take, or the relationships you didn't preserve? That night, I sat at my desk with Northwestern's acceptance letter in front of me and Mrs. Patterson's list of resources beside it. The deadline to accept the scholarship was only 5 days away. I had to make a choice that would define the rest of my life, and either option felt like losing something irreplaceable. I decided to make one final attempt to bridge the gap with my parents. I found them in the kitchen after dinner, my mother washing dishes while my father reviewed invoices at the table. I had prepared what I thought was a perfect compromise, a solution that would give me the education I craved while still maintaining my connection to our family business. I've been thinking about our situation, I began, trying to keep my voice steady and reasonable. What if I deferred Northwestern for a year, worked full-time at the shop to help you find and train a replacement, and then went to college with your blessing? I could even major in business with a focus on automotive industry management. When I graduated, I'd come back with the exact skills our business needs to expand and compete with the bigger chains. My father didn't even look up from his paperwork. We've already discussed this, Jessica. The answer is no, but this way everyone wins. I pressed on. You get a full year to adjust to the idea and prepare the business for my absence. I get my education, and when I come back, I'll be exponentially more valuable as a business partner. You'll be different, my mother said, not turning away from the dishes she was scrubbing with unnecessary force. 4 years of professors filling your head with theories and classmates telling you how backward your family is. You'll come back looking down on us. That's not true, I said, frustration bleeding into my voice despite my efforts to stay calm. I love this family. I love this business. I just want to make it better. My father finally looked up, and his expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. You think what we've built isn't good enough. You think the business that fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years, needs to be improved by some college girl who's never worked a real day in her life. I've worked here since I was 12, I protested. I know this business inside and out. You know what we've taught you, he corrected, but you've never had to worry about making payroll when customers don't pay their bills. You've never had to choose between fixing the roof or buying new equipment. You've never had to smile at customers who treat you like dirt because you need their money to keep the lights on. That's the real business, Jessica, not whatever they teach in some ivory tower classroom. Then let me learn both sides, I said desperately. Let me get the education and come back with tools to help us never have to make those impossible choices again. But I could see in their faces that no argument would be enough. They had decided long ago that my independence was a threat to their security, and nothing I could say would change that fundamental equation. 2 days before the scholarship deadline, I made my choice. I couldn't spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. I couldn't build a future on the foundation of my own diminished dreams. And most importantly, I couldn't accept that real love required the complete sacrifice of my individual potential. I called Northwestern and accepted their offer. Then I spent the next 48 hours preparing for a conversation that I knew would end my life as I had always known it. On a Tuesday morning in May, with graduation just 2 weeks away, I sat my parents down in our living room and delivered the news that would shatter our family forever. I've accepted the scholarship to Northwestern, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. I'll be leaving for college in August. The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, that terrible calm before everything gets destroyed. My mother was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica, please don't do this. Please don't choose strangers over your family. I'm not choosing strangers over family, I replied. I'm choosing my future, and I was hoping my family would choose to be part of that future. My father stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled in a way that made my stomach clench with fear. Get out, he said. Dad, please, let's talk about this. Get out of my house. His voice was louder now, harder. If you want to be an adult, if you want to make adult decisions without consulting your family, Then you can live like an adult, on your own. Robert, please, my mother said, tears streaming down her cheeks. She's our daughter. Our daughter would have respected our wishes, he replied, never taking his eyes off me. Our daughter would have honored her obligations to this family. I don't know who this person is, but she's not welcome in our home. I felt like I was drowning in the middle of a room full of air. You're really going to disown me? Your only child, because I want to get an education. We're disowning you because you're selfish and ungrateful, my mother said, her sadness turning into anger that felt like acid on an open wound. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. By abandoning us when we need you most. You don't need me, I said, finding my voice even as my heart shattered. You want to control me. There's a difference. Pack your things, my father said, walking toward the front door and opening it wide. You have 1 hour. I stared at him, this man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had bandaged my scraped knees, who had once told me I could be anything I wanted to be. I searched his face for any sign of the father I had loved, but all I saw was cold resolution. 1 hour, he repeated. The next 60 minutes were the longest and shortest of my life. I moved through my childhood bedroom like a sleepwalker, packing 18 years of existence into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. I took my clothes, my school supplies, my acceptance letters, and a few precious mementos that represented the person I had been before this moment changed everything. I left behind photo albums, awards, books, furniture, and every other tangible piece of evidence that Jessica Martinez had ever lived in that house. My mother stood in my doorway as I finished packing, tears streaming down her face, but no words of comfort or reconciliation on her lips. This is your choice, she said as I shouldered my bags. Remember that, when you're struggling and alone and wondering why your life is so hard, remember that you chose this. I paused at the threshold of my childhood bedroom and looked at her one last time. And when you're lying awake at night missing your daughter, I replied, remember that you chose this too. I walked through our house for the last time, past family photos that would soon be removed, past the kitchen table, where I had done homework for years, past the living room where we used to watch movies together on Friday nights. Every step felt like walking through a graveyard of memories that would never be made. My father was standing by the open front door, his arms crossed, his face set in stone. I hope your education is worth it, he said, as I approached. I stopped directly in front of him, looked into the eyes of the man who had raised me, and made a promise that would sustain me through the darkest days ahead. It will be, I said. Then I walked out of the only home I had ever known, and heard the door slam shut behind me with a finality that echoed through my bones. I stood on the sidewalk in front of our house, holding everything I owned in 3 bags, with $17 in my pocket and nowhere to go. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and the world was continuing as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed. I was 18 years old, completely alone, and about to discover what it really meant to survive on nothing but determination and the desperate hope that I had made the right choice. But as terrifying as the moment was, as lost and abandoned as I felt standing there on that sidewalk, there was also something else growing in my chest. Something that felt like freedom, something that felt like possibility, something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, I was strong enough to build a life that was entirely my own. I shouldered my bags, took one last look at the house, where I had learned both love and betrayal, and started walking toward whatever came next. The first week after leaving home was a blur of survival instincts I didn't know I possessed. Mrs. Patterson had connected me with a local shelter for young adults, a cramped building that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I shared a room with 3 other girls, each with their own story of family dysfunction, and learned quickly that privacy was a luxury I could no longer afford. During the day, I haunted the public library, using their computers to apply for every scholarship, grant, and work-study program I could find. I filled out FAFSA forms as an independent student, a process that required me to prove my estrangement from my parents, through documentation I didn't have. The financial aid office wanted court papers, social services records, anything official that could verify my situation. All I had were the clothes on my back, and the memory of a slammed door. I took a job at a local diner, working double shifts whenever possible for $7.50 an hour, plus whatever tips generous customers might leave. My hands, which had once calculated profit margins and managed customer databases, now carried plates of greasy food and cleaned tables sticky with syrup. But every dollar I earned was mine, every decision I made was mine, and slowly I began to understand what freedom actually cost. The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion or the financial stress, it was the crushing loneliness that hit me every evening when I returned to the shelter. I would lie in my narrow bunk, listening to the sounds of a dozen other displaced young people trying to fall asleep, and wonder if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. In quiet moments, I caught myself reaching for my phone to call my mother, to hear her voice, to pretend for just a moment that none of this had happened. But pride and stubbornness ran deep in my family, and I had inherited both traits in abundance. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of thinking I couldn't survive without them. I wouldn't prove their point that I was too naive and sheltered to make it in the real world. By July, I had managed to secure enough financial aid to cover tuition and basic living expenses at Northwestern. I had qualified for several need-based grants, found a work-study position in the university's business library, and even earned a small scholarship specifically designed for first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds. The irony wasn't lost on me that I qualified for poverty assistance, while my parents ran a successful business that I had helped build. Moving to Chicago felt like stepping into another universe. The city was vast and impersonal in a way that both terrified and liberated me. No one knew my story, no one had expectations about who I should be or what I should do with my life. I was completely anonymous, which meant I was completely free to reinvent myself. My dormitory room was smaller than the bedroom I had left behind, but it was mine in a way that childhood bedroom never really was. I decorated it with clearance items, from discount stores and photographs I printed at the library. I created a space that reflected who I wanted to become, rather than who I had always been. The academic workload was intense but exhilarating. For the first time in my life, I was learning things that interested me purely for the sake of knowledge, rather than immediate practical application. I studied economics and management theory, marketing strategies, and organizational psychology. Every class felt like acquiring new tools for building the life I envisioned for myself. I excelled academically, but the social aspect of college proved more challenging. Most of my classmates came from families that had supported their educational ambitions, had helped them choose classes, and navigate campus resources. They spoke casually about spring break trips and family visits, about care packages, and emergency funds that appeared whenever needed. I learned to nod along with these conversations while internally cataloging the growing list of experiences I couldn't relate to. During my sophomore year, I received an unexpected call that would test everything I had learned about independence and family loyalty. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and I was working late in the library when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Jessica?" The voice was hesitant, older than I remembered, but unmistakably my mother's. My heart stopped. 2.5 years had passed since I'd heard that voice, 2.5 years of wondering if my parents ever thought about me, if they ever regretted the choice they had forced me to make. I whispered, suddenly aware that I was in a public space and this conversation needed privacy. She started, then stopped. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could picture her sitting in our kitchen, probably at the same table where I had announced my college plans so long ago. "I got your number from Mrs. Patterson. I hope that's okay. Is everything all right?" I asked, because despite everything that had happened, despite the anger and hurt and years of silence, she was still my mother, and the fear in her voice triggered every protective instinct I had. "It's your father," she said, and I heard her start to cry. "He's sick, Jessica. Really sick." The world tilted sideways. Whatever I had expected from this conversation, it wasn't this. "What do you mean sick?" "Cancer," she said, the word falling between us like a stone into still water. "Lung cancer. Stage 3. The doctors say." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I sank into the nearest chair, my textbooks forgotten, my carefully constructed adult life suddenly feeling fragile and insignificant. "How long have you known?" I asked. 6 months, she admitted. "We didn't want to worry you." "Worry me?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "You didn't want to worry me, or you didn't want to admit you needed your ungrateful daughter. There was a long silence, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more fragile than I had ever heard it. Both maybe, she said. Jessica, I know we hurt you, I know we made mistakes, but he's dying, and he wants to see you before. Before what? I demanded. Before he apologizes for disowning his only child, before he admits that maybe education wasn't the enemy after all. Before he dies without ever seeing you again, she said quietly. The simple honesty of that statement hit me harder than any manipulation or guilt trip could have. I sat in that library, surrounded by the books and knowledge I had sacrificed everything to obtain, and felt the careful walls I had built around my heart beginning to crack. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course, she replied quickly. Of course you do. But Jessica, please don't take too much time. The doctor said maybe 6 months if the treatment works. Maybe less if it doesn't. After she hung up, I sat in the empty library for hours, staring at my reflection in the dark windows, and trying to process what I was feeling. Anger, certainly. Grief for the father who was dying before we could heal our relationship. Guilt for being angry at a dying man. Fear that seeing them again would undo all the progress I had made in building my independent life. But underneath all of those emotions was something I hadn't expected: opportunity. I had spent nearly 3 years proving to myself and to them that I could survive without their support, that I could build something meaningful from nothing but determination and hard work. I had the education they had tried to deny me, the life experiences they had tried to prevent, and the self-confidence that came from knowing I could take care of myself no matter what happened. For the first time since walking out of their house, I held all the power in our relationship. They needed something from me now, needed my forgiveness, my presence, my willingness to pretend that the past could be overcome by the urgency of death. The question was, what did I want to do with that power? I spent the next week researching everything I could about my father's condition, about treatment options and survival rates and what the progression of his illness would look like. I approached it like a business problem, gathering data and analyzing options, because thinking about it emotionally was too overwhelming. I also did something that would have been impossible 3 years earlier: I sought help. I made an appointment with the university's counseling center, and spent an hour talking to a therapist about family estrangement and dying parents and the complicated mathematics of forgiveness. What do you want from this situation? The counselor asked me. Not what they want, not what you think you should want, but what would actually serve your best interests. It was a question I had never considered from that angle. I want closure, I said slowly. I want to understand why they made the choices they did. And I want them to understand the cost of those choices. Those are reasonable goals, she said. But are you prepared for the possibility that you might not get what you're looking for? That your father might not be capable of the kind of conversation you need to have? I think I am, I said. But there's something else. I want to be able to look back on this situation in 20 years and know that I acted with integrity. That I was better than the worst version of myself. That weekend I drove back to Millbrook for the first time since leaving. The town looked smaller than I remembered, more tired and worn around the edges. I drove slowly through the familiar streets, past my old high school, past the diner where I had worked that first desperate summer, past the library, where I had applied for scholarships with fingers crossed and hopes high. Finally, I pulled into the parking lot of Martinez Auto Repair, and sat in my car, looking at the building where I had spent so much of my childhood. The sign needed repainting, and the parking lot had more potholes than I remembered, but it was still there, still functioning, apparently still successful enough to support my parents. My mother must have been watching for me because she came out of the office before I had even turned off my engine. She looked older, more fragile, with gray threading through her hair, and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when I left. But she was still my mother, and seeing her face triggered a complicated mix of love and resentment that made my chest ache. "Jessica," she said as I got out of the car, and there were tears in her eyes. "Thank you for coming. Where is he?" I asked, not trusting myself with emotional pleasantries. "Inside," she said. "He's having a good day today. The medication helps with the pain, but it makes him tired." I followed her into the shop, breathing in the familiar smell of motor oil and metal shavings and the particular brand of hand soap they had always used. Everything looked exactly the same, as if the building had been frozen in time since the day I left. My father was sitting in the office behind the same desk where I had learned to calculate taxes and manage inventory. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw the shock register on his face, followed quickly by something that might have been relief. "Jessica," he said, and his voice was raspier than I remembered, probably from the cancer or the treatment or both. "Dad," I replied, and suddenly I was 18 again, standing in our living room with acceptance letters in my hand and hope in my heart. We stared at each other across the small office space, across 3 years of silence and hurt and stubborn pride, and I realized that neither of us knew how to bridge the gap we had created. "You look good," he said finally. "College agrees with you." It was such a small acknowledgement, but coming from him it felt monumental. This man who had forbidden me from pursuing higher education was admitting that it had been good for me. "It's been challenging," I said carefully, "but worthwhile." He nodded, and I could see him processing the implications of my success, the evidence that maybe his fears about college had been unfounded. "Your mother says you're studying business," he continued. "Business administration with a focus on operations management," I confirmed. "I'm learning a lot about efficiency optimization and market analysis." He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the old interest he used to show when I would explain new concepts I had learned from our customers or suppliers. "That sounds useful," he said, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "What does that mean exactly?" And so we began to talk. Not about the past or the conflict that had driven us apart, but about business theory and practical applications, about the concepts I was learning in school and how they might apply to a family-owned auto repair shop. It was safe territory, neutral ground where we could remember how to communicate without confronting the years of pain between us. As we talked, I began to see things about our family business that my education had taught me to recognize. The inefficient scheduling system that cost them money and labor hours. The lack of digital marketing that was allowing newer shops to capture market share. The outdated inventory management that tied up cash flow unnecessarily. "You know," I said carefully, "there are some strategies I've learned that might help with some of the challenges you've mentioned." My father looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Such as?" I spent the next hour explaining customer relationship management software and digital marketing techniques, lean inventory principles, and employee scheduling optimization. I showed him apps on my phone that could streamline appointment booking and customer communication. I sketched out workflow diagrams on the back of invoices and calculated potential cost savings from minor operational adjustments. By the time I finished, both my parents were staring at me with something that looked like amazement. "How much would it cost to implement these changes?" my mother asked. "Most of it would just be time and effort," I replied. "The software subscriptions might run a few $100s a month, but the efficiency gains should more than offset that cost within the first quarter." My father was quiet for a long moment, studying the notes I had made. Finally he looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen since I was a child, showing him my report card. "You really learned all this in college?" he asked. "This and a lot more," I said. "The principles I'm studying apply to businesses of every size, from Fortune 500 companies to family operations like yours." "Like ours," my mother corrected gently. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication and possibility. That evening, my parents took me to dinner at the same restaurant where we had celebrated my high school graduation, back when we all thought the future held nothing but bright possibilities. The conversation was careful but genuine, with all of us trying to navigate the strange territory of rebuilding a relationship that had been shattered and was now being reconstructed under completely different circumstances. "I owe you an apology," my father said as we were finishing our meal. "I was wrong about college. I was wrong about a lot of things." "You were scared," I said, surprising myself with how easily the understanding came. "You were afraid of losing me, so you tried to control me instead." "I understand the impulse, even if I can't forgive the execution." "Can you forgive the intent?" he asked quietly. I considered the question carefully. "I think I can work toward that," I said. "But Dad, you need to understand that your fear almost destroyed my future. If I had listened to you, if I had stayed, I would never have become the person I am now. I would never have learned the things I've learned or developed the confidence I've developed. Your protection would have been my prison." He nodded slowly, I can see that now, he said, watching you explain those business concepts today, seeing how your mind works, how you analyze problems and develop solutions. You've become someone I never imagined you could be. I became who I always had the potential to be, I corrected. The only thing college did was give me the tools and the environment to develop that potential. Over the next several months, I found myself drawn back to Millbrook more frequently than I had expected. Ostensibly, I was there to help my parents implement the operational improvements we had discussed, to spend time with my father while his health permitted, to slowly rebuild the bridges that had been burned so completely 3 years earlier. But as I worked alongside them, updating their systems and training them on new processes, I began to see something I hadn't anticipated. The business wasn't just inefficient, it was struggling. The profit margins I had calculated as a teenager had been steadily eroding due to increased competition and rising costs. The customer base was aging and shrinking as younger car owners gravitated toward newer shops with more modern equipment and services. Martinez Auto Repair wasn't just stuck in the past operationally, it was becoming obsolete economically. How long has business been declining? I asked my mother one evening, as we reviewed the financial records I had been analyzing. She sighed heavily. About 2 years, she admitted. Maybe longer. Your father didn't want to worry you when you first left, and then when he got sick, we were more focused on his treatment than on the business. Why didn't you tell me when you called about Dad's diagnosis? Because we didn't want you to think we were only reaching out because we needed your help, she said. We wanted to see you because you're our daughter and he's dying. The business problems are separate, but I was beginning to suspect they weren't separate at all. The timing of my father's illness, the financial stress of medical bills combined with declining revenue, the reality that they might lose both their health and their livelihood simultaneously. It painted a picture of desperation that made their outreach to me look less like family reconciliation and more like a rescue mission. The realization should have made me angry. 3 years earlier, it would have made me furious. But now, with the confidence that came from proving I could succeed independently, it mostly made me sad. Sad for parents who were too proud to ask for help directly, sad for a family business that might not survive the next generation, sad for the years we had lost to stubborn pride and mutual misunderstanding. But it also presented me with an opportunity that I hadn't expected and wasn't sure I wanted. I was scheduled to graduate in 18 months with a degree in business administration and a job offer from a consulting firm in Chicago. I had built a life that was entirely my own, had proved that I could succeed without depending on anyone else, had created an identity that wasn't tied to family expectations or limitations. But I also had the knowledge and skills that could potentially save my family's business. I understood their operational challenges, had ideas for modernizing their services and expanding their market reach, could see paths forward that my parents couldn't envision on their own. The question was whether saving their business was my responsibility, and whether doing so would represent healing or regression. I spent the winter break of my junior year working full-time at the shop, implementing the changes we had discussed and gathering data on their effectiveness. The results were encouraging but not miraculous. Customer satisfaction improved, operational efficiency increased, and profit margins showed modest growth. But the fundamental challenge remained: the automotive repair industry was evolving faster than a small family shop could adapt without significant capital investment and strategic repositioning. We need to expand services, I told my parents during a planning meeting in January. Oil changes and basic maintenance aren't enough anymore. Customers want diagnostic services, electronic system repairs, even hybrid and electric vehicle maintenance. The shops that survive are the ones that can offer comprehensive automotive care. That sounds expensive, my mother said. It is, I confirmed. We're probably looking at $50,000 minimum for new diagnostic equipment, another $20,000 for training and certification, plus the ongoing costs of staying current with emerging technologies. My father, who had been unusually quiet during our meeting, finally spoke up. We don't have that kind of money, Jessica. Between the medical bills and the business decline, we're barely keeping the doors open. I had suspected as much, but hearing him confirm it made the situation feel more urgent and more complicated. There are business loans available, I said. With the right business plan and financial projections, we could probably secure the funding we need. And who would manage this expansion? My mother asked. Your father can't work full-time anymore, and I don't have the technical knowledge to supervise new services. The unspoken question hung in the air between us. They were asking without actually asking whether I would come back, whether I would sacrifice the independent life I had built to save the family business that had once been used to trap me. I need time to think about this, I said. But even as I said it, I knew I was already thinking about it. I was already calculating what it would mean to return to Millbrook, to take over operational management of the business, to become what my parents had always wanted me to be, just under completely different circumstances than any of us had imagined. The difference was that now it would be my choice, made with full knowledge of alternatives and opportunities. If I came back, it wouldn't be because I had no other options or because I was too afraid to leave. It would be because I had considered all possibilities and decided that this was the path that aligned with my values and goals. But first I needed to understand exactly what I would be agreeing to and what I would expect in return. Over the next month, I conducted a comprehensive analysis of Martinez Auto Repair that went far beyond the operational improvements we had already implemented. I evaluated the financial records going back 5 years, researched industry trends and competitive positioning, analyzed the local market for automotive services, and developed multiple scenarios for the business's future under different management strategies. What I discovered was both better and worse than I had expected. The good news was that the business had strong customer loyalty, an excellent reputation for quality work, and a prime location that would be expensive for competitors to replicate. The operational improvements I had implemented were showing sustained positive results, and there was clear demand in the local market for the expanded services I had proposed. The bad news was that without significant changes, the business would be bankrupt within 18 months. The combination of declining revenue, increasing costs, and mounting medical bills had created a financial trajectory that was unsustainable regardless of operational efficiency. But the most important discovery was something I found buried in the business's legal documents, something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's situation and my own future. 3 years earlier, when my parents had decided to prevent me from accessing my grandmother's estate, they had done more than just claim I was incapacitated. They had also restructured the business to protect it from potential creditors, transferring ownership to a family trust with specific succession provisions. According to the documents I found, if my father died or became permanently incapacitated, and if my mother was unable to continue operating the business, ownership would transfer automatically to the next generation. To me, whether I wanted it or not, whether I was prepared for it or not, Martinez Auto Repair was going to become my inheritance. The only question was whether I would inherit a thriving business or the remnants of a failed one. My parents had never told me about this provision, probably because they had never expected it to become relevant. But now, with my father's health declining and my mother overwhelmed by the combination of caregiving and business management, the legal reality was becoming a practical inevitability. I was going to own this business. The only question was what condition it would be in when that happened, and whether I would have any say in determining its fate. For the first time since receiving my mother's phone call about my father's illness, I felt like I held real power in this situation. Not just the emotional leverage of a reconciling family member, but actual legal and financial control over outcomes that mattered to all of us. The question was, what did I want to do with that power, and what price was I willing to demand for using it to save the business that had once been used to limit my freedom? The moment I realized I held all the cards, everything changed. I wasn't the desperate 18-year-old girl standing on a doorstep anymore. I was a senior business student with a 3.9 GPA, internship experience at a Fortune 500 company, and job offers from 3 different consulting firms. I had options, leverage, and most importantly, I had learned the difference between love and manipulation. I sat in my dorm room that night, with the trust documents spread across my desk, and for the first time in years, I felt truly powerful. My parents needed me now, not just emotionally but financially and legally. The business they had once used to control me was now my inheritance, and its survival depended entirely on decisions I would make. But power without purpose is just revenge, and I had spent too many years building my character to waste this opportunity on petty satisfaction. I drafted a proposal, not a family conversation or an emotional plea, but a formal business proposal complete with terms, conditions, and expectations. If they wanted my help saving Martinez Auto Repair, if they wanted me to consider returning to Millbrook and taking over operations, then we were going to do this properly. With contracts, legal protections, and mutual accountability. The meeting I called for the following weekend felt different from every other family interaction we'd had. I arrived with printed copies of my proposal, financial projections, and a timeline for implementation. I had learned from the best business professors in the country how to present complex ideas clearly and persuasively, and I intended to use every skill I'd acquired. My parents sat across from me in their living room, the same room where they had once demanded I choose between family and education, but the power dynamic was completely reversed. Now I was the one making demands. "I've prepared a comprehensive plan for the business," I began, sliding copies of my proposal across the coffee table. "But before we discuss operational details, we need to address the fundamental relationship issues that brought us to this point." My father opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "Let me finish," I said firmly. "3 years ago, you gave me an ultimatum. You told me to choose between my education and my family. You said that if I left for college, I would be leaving without your support, financial or emotional. Do you remember those words?" They both nodded, my mother's eyes already filling with tears. "Good," I continued, "because now I'm giving you an ultimatum. If you want my help saving this business, if you want me to use my education and skills to prevent bankruptcy, then you're going to acknowledge publicly and legally that you were wrong. You're going to admit that your attempts to control my future were misguided and harmful. And you're going to ensure that this kind of manipulation never happens again." I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "This is a formal apology letter," I said. "You're going to sign it, and I'm going to share it with everyone who knew about our estrangement. Mrs. Patterson, our extended family, the customers who asked why I never came around anymore. You're going to tell them that you made a mistake trying to prevent me from getting an education." My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't protest. My mother reached for the letter with shaking hands. "This second document," I continued, "establishes me as the operational manager of Martinez Auto Repair, with full authority over business decisions. You'll retain ownership during your lifetimes, but I'll have complete control over day-to-day operations, strategic planning, and financial management. No more family meetings where business decisions get overruled by parental authority." "Jessica," my mother started, "we never meant to." "The third document," I interrupted, "is a contract guaranteeing my independence. If I take over this business, I do it as an autonomous adult, not as your daughter who owes you obedience. My personal life, my relationships, my future decisions about marriage, children, or career changes are off limits to your input, unless I specifically ask for advice." I leaned back in my chair and watched them absorb what I was proposing. "And if we agree to all this," my father asked quietly, "then I withdraw my acceptance from the consulting firm in Chicago. I finish my degree through Northwestern's distance learning program, and I move back to Millbrook to save your business. I'll implement the expansion plan I've developed, secure the necessary funding, and turn Martinez Auto Repair into the most successful automotive service center in 3 counties." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of reversed fortunes and wounded pride being swallowed for the sake of survival. My mother was the first to speak. "Why are you willing to do this? After everything we put you through, why would you come back?" It was a fair question, and one I had asked myself repeatedly while drafting the proposal. "Because I learned something in college that you never taught me," I said. "I learned the difference between being controlled by circumstances and choosing to engage with them. 3 years ago, I left because I had no choice. Now I'm considering coming back because I do have a choice, and I'm choosing based on my own values and priorities, not your expectations." "And what are those values?" my father asked. "Excellence," I said immediately. "I believe in doing things well, in taking on challenges that matter, in building something meaningful. This business has potential that's been wasted by outdated thinking and fear of change. I can fix that. What else?" My mother pressed. "Justice," I continued. "You tried to limit my potential to serve your needs. Now your needs require my potential to be fully realized. There's a certain poetic justice in that situation that appeals to me. My father asked, sensing there was more. Love, I admitted, and my voice softened, despite my efforts to maintain professional detachment. Despite everything that happened, despite the hurt and the anger and the years of silence, you're still my parents. I still love you, even when I don't like your choices. And love sometimes means doing difficult things for people who don't deserve them. My parents exchanged a look that communicated more than words could have. We'll sign your documents, my father said finally. All of them, whatever you need. Good, I replied, pulling out pens. Then let's get started. The transformation of Martinez Auto Repair over the following 18 months was nothing short of remarkable. I approached it like the business case studies I had analyzed in school, identifying inefficiencies, implementing solutions, measuring results, and continuously adjusting strategies based on data and customer feedback. The first phase involved modernizing our service offerings. I secured a business loan using the detailed financial projections I had developed, invested in state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, and enrolled our technicians in advanced training programs. We began offering services that our competitors couldn't match: hybrid vehicle maintenance, advanced electronics repair, and comprehensive preventive care programs. The second phase focused on customer experience optimization. I implemented a digital scheduling system that eliminated waiting time confusion, created a customer communication platform that provided real-time updates on repair progress, and established a loyalty program that rewarded long-term customers while attracting new ones. The third phase was market expansion. I developed partnerships with local businesses for fleet maintenance contracts, established relationships with insurance companies for preferred provider status, and created a mobile service division that brought basic maintenance directly to customers' locations. Within 6 months, our revenue had increased by 40%. Within a year, we had expanded from 3 employees to 8, and were considering opening a second location. Within 18 months, Martinez Auto Repair was the most successful automotive service business in Millbrook and the surrounding area. But the real transformation wasn't in the business metrics, it was in the relationships. Working alongside my parents as an equal rather than a subordinate revealed aspects of their personalities that I had never been allowed to see. My father, freed from the constant stress of financial uncertainty, displayed a passion for mechanical problem-solving and customer service that reminded me why I had once loved helping in the shop. My mother, relieved of the burden of managing systems she didn't understand, focused her energy on building relationships with customers and suppliers that strengthened our community connections in ways that directly impacted our bottom line. We still disagreed about things. We still had moments of tension when old patterns of family dynamics tried to reassert themselves. But now we had frameworks for resolving conflicts professionally, and I had the authority to make final decisions when consensus couldn't be reached. My father's health stabilized under a treatment regimen that was made possible by the excellent insurance coverage we could now afford. He worked part-time, focusing on the technical aspects he enjoyed most while leaving administrative responsibilities to me. My mother discovered talents for marketing and customer relations that had been suppressed by years of simply trying to keep the business afloat. The success we achieved together was sweeter than any individual accomplishment could have been. Not because it proved them right about family business being preferable to corporate careers, but because it proved that smart, capable people could overcome past mistakes and build something better than what they had before. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. 2 years after I had returned to Millbrook, I received a phone call from Dr. Sarah Chen, the business professor who had been my favorite mentor at Northwestern. She had heard about our success through the small business network and wanted to visit our operation to see what we had accomplished. When she arrived for her tour, accompanied by 2 graduate students who were researching family business transitions, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with family approval and everything to do with professional achievement. Jessica, Dr. Chen said as we concluded the tour, "What you've accomplished here is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we try to teach in business school. You've taken theoretical concepts and applied them in a real-world context to create measurable value. This operation could be a case study for other family businesses struggling with succession planning and modernization challenges." "That's very flattering," I replied, "but I'm not sure our situation is replicable. The specific circumstances that brought me back were pretty unique." The circumstances were unique, she agreed, but the principles are universal. You established clear authority structures, implemented systematic improvements, maintained focus on customer value, and created accountability mechanisms that prevented backsliding into old patterns. Those strategies work in any context. 6 months later, I received an invitation to speak at Northwestern's annual Family Business Conference about succession planning and modernization strategies. Standing at the podium in the same university where I had once been a struggling student, looking out at an audience of successful business owners and graduate students, I felt the full circle of my journey in a way that was both humbling and empowering. The most important lesson I learned from my experience, I told the audience during my presentation, is that sometimes the best way to honor your family is to refuse to be limited by their fears. Love doesn't require you to make yourself smaller to make others comfortable. Real love challenges everyone to become their best possible version. After the presentation, during the networking reception, I was approached by a young woman who reminded me of myself at 18, bright, ambitious, and clearly struggling with family expectations that conflicted with her personal goals. "My parents want me to take over our restaurant," she said. "But I want to study hospitality management first, learn about the industry from a broader perspective. They think college is a waste of time and money. They think I should just learn by working in the family business." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think they're afraid," she said. "Afraid that if I get educated, I'll think I'm too good for them. Afraid that I'll leave and never come back." "Those are understandable fears," I replied. "But fear-based decisions rarely lead to optimal outcomes. The question is whether you can find a way to pursue your education while also addressing their legitimate concerns about the business." We talked for 20 minutes about strategies for managing family resistance to educational goals, about ways to demonstrate that learning enhances rather than threatens family business success, and about the importance of establishing clear boundaries between personal development and family loyalty. As I watched her walk away with renewed confidence and a concrete plan for approaching her parents, I realized that my story had become bigger than just my own experience. It had become a template that others could adapt to their own circumstances, a proof of concept that family love and individual achievement didn't have to be mutually exclusive. That night, driving back to Millbrook after the conference, I reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought me to this point. I had left home to escape limitations and returned home to transcend them. I had pursued education to gain independence and used that independence to strengthen family connections. I had fought for the right to make my own choices, and ultimately chosen to dedicate my talents to the success of people who had once tried to prevent me from developing those talents. The business that had once been used to control me was now a vehicle for my professional fulfillment. The parents who had once tried to limit my potential were now beneficiaries of its full expression. The education they had once forbidden was now the foundation of our shared success. None of it had happened the way any of us had planned, but all of it had happened better than any of us could have imagined. Today, Martinez Auto Repair employs 15 people and serves customers from 4 surrounding counties. We've opened 2 additional locations and are planning a third. My father's health has remained stable, my mother has discovered entrepreneurial talents she never knew she possessed, and I've built a business that reflects my values while honoring my family's legacy. But more importantly, we've built relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, on collaboration rather than control, on shared goals rather than imposed expectations. The contract I made them sign 3 years ago hangs framed in my office, not as a weapon or a reminder of past conflicts, but as a symbol of what becomes possible when people choose to grow beyond their limitations and love each other enough to demand excellence. Sometimes the people who try to clip your wings are the same people who will eventually benefit most from your ability to soar. The key is making sure that when you choose to come back down to earth, it's because you want to be there, not because you never learned how to fly. Your story might be different from mine, your family dynamics might require different strategies, your dreams might lead you in completely different directions. But the principle remains the same: never let anyone else's fear determine the boundaries of your potential. Love yourself enough to become who you're meant to be, and trust that the people who truly love you will eventually celebrate your success, rather than resent it. The door they slammed behind me became the opening I needed to discover my own strength. The contract I made them sign became the foundation for rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. Sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is refuse to be limited by their limitations, and sometimes the most loving thing they can do in return is admit they were wrong and step aside to let you shine. 5 years have passed since that contract changed everything, and I'm writing this from my corner office overlooking Main Street in downtown Millbrook. The view includes 3 Martinez Auto Centers, a detail that still amazes me some mornings when I arrive with my coffee and remember the scared 18-year-old who once thought this town held nothing but limitations. Yesterday, something happened that brought my entire journey into sharp focus. A young man named Marcus walked into our flagship location asking to speak with the owner. He was 19, dressed in work clothes that had seen better days, carrying a folder of documents that he clutched like a lifeline. "Ma'am," he said, when I introduced myself, "I heard you help people who are having problems with their families about college." His story was heartbreakingly familiar: parents who owned a small construction company, academic achievements they dismissed as irrelevant, dreams of studying engineering that they saw as betrayal of family loyalty, an acceptance letter to a state university that might as well have been a declaration of war. But there was something different about Marcus, something that reminded me not of my 18-year-old self, but of who I had become. He wasn't asking for permission or seeking validation, he was asking for strategy. "I've been researching your story," he said, pulling out newspaper clippings and printed articles about our business success. "I know what you did with the contract, how you made them acknowledge they were wrong. I want to do something similar, but my situation is different." I spent 2 hours with Marcus that afternoon, and by the end of our conversation, I realized something profound had shifted in how I understood my own experience. I was no longer the person who had overcome family limitation. I had become someone who helped others navigate similar challenges, and that role felt more significant than any personal victory ever could. Marcus implemented his own version of my strategy over the following months. He presented his parents with a detailed business plan, showing how his engineering degree could help modernize their construction methods, increase profitability, and position them for growth in sustainable building markets. He offered them a partnership rather than demanding permission, and he backed up his proposals with data, projections, and a timeline for implementation. His approach worked, but more importantly, it worked because he had adapted my experience to his unique circumstances, rather than simply copying what I had done. That's when I realized the true power of what I had accidentally created: not a specific solution, but a replicable framework that others could modify for their own situations. This realization led to something I never expected. I started receiving calls from parents, not just from young people struggling with family resistance to their goals. Parents who were watching their children drift away because of conflicts over education, career choices, or life decisions. Parents who wanted to understand how to support their children's ambitions without losing them entirely. "I think I'm making the same mistake you said your parents made," one mother told me during a phone consultation. "My daughter wants to study art instead of taking over our accounting firm, and I keep trying to convince her she's making a mistake. But after reading about your situation, I'm wondering if I'm the one making the mistake." These conversations taught me something crucial about family dynamics that I hadn't fully understood even after rebuilding my own relationships. Most parents who try to control their children's futures aren't motivated by selfishness or malice. They're motivated by love expressed through fear, by protective instincts that become destructive when taken too far. My parents hadn't tried to limit my potential because they wanted me to fail. They had tried to limit my potential because they were terrified of losing me, terrified that my success would make me too good for them, terrified that the world beyond Millbrook would offer me things they couldn't compete with. Understanding this difference didn't excuse their behavior, but it did explain why rebuilding our relationship had been possible once the power dynamic shifted. They had never stopped loving me, they had just needed to learn how to love me without trying to control me. This insight transformed how I approached the business mentoring that had become an unexpected part of my professional life. Instead of focusing primarily on helping young people resist family pressure, I began working with entire families to restructure their relationships around mutual support rather than control. The Martinez Auto Centers became an unofficial case study for family business consulting, but more than that, they became a symbol of what's possible when people choose growth over comfort, when they choose to address problems directly, rather than hoping they'll resolve themselves. Last month, I received an invitation that brought everything full circle. Northwestern University asked me to serve on their Family Business Institute Advisory Board, contributing to research and curriculum development for programs designed to help family enterprises navigate succession challenges and modernization needs. Accepting that position meant acknowledging that my story had evolved beyond personal triumph into something with broader social impact. The scared teenager, who once chose education over family approval, had become someone whose experience could influence how institutions think about family dynamics, business succession, and the relationship between individual achievement and family loyalty. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 6 months ago, my father asked me to co-author an article for a trade publication about succession planning in family automotive businesses. The article, titled When Love Looks Like Letting Go, a father-daughter perspective on family business transition, has been reprinted in 3 different industry magazines and cited in academic research about family enterprise management. Writing that article together, seeing our different perspectives woven into a coherent narrative about growth and change, and the evolution of family relationships, felt like the completion of a journey that began with a slammed door and an acceptance letter. I've learned something important from watching you build your life, my father wrote in his section of the article. Children aren't meant to be smaller versions of their parents, they're meant to be better versions of themselves. My job wasn't to keep Jessica close to me. My job was to prepare her to succeed wherever her talents could take her. I forgot that for a while, and almost lost her because of it. Reading those words in print, seeing them published under both our names, I felt a healing that was deeper than professional success or financial achievement. I felt the restoration of something I had thought was permanently broken, transformed into something stronger and more valuable than what we had started with. Today, Martinez Auto Centers employs over 40 people across our 3 locations. We've become the largest automotive service provider in our region, with expansion plans that will take us into neighboring states within the next 2 years. The business that once represented limitation and control has become a platform for innovation and growth that exceeds anything my parents originally envisioned. But the numbers that matter most to me aren't revenue figures or employee counts. They're the 17 young people who have contacted me for advice about managing family resistance to their goals. They're the 12 families I've worked with to restructure their relationships around support rather than control. They're the 4 other family businesses in our area that have used our model to successfully navigate their own succession challenges. The contract that once seemed like a weapon has become a template that others adapt for their own circumstances. The education that once caused family division has become a bridge that connects our personal success to broader community impact. The choice that once felt like choosing between love and independence has proven that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be limited by other people's fears. My story isn't unique in its broad outlines. Countless young people face pressure to sacrifice their potential for family comfort. Countless parents struggle with the fear that their children's success will leave them behind. Countless families experience division when individual ambition conflicts with collective expectation. What makes my story worth sharing isn't that I overcame these challenges, but how I overcame them. Not through rebellion or resentment, but through strategic thinking and clear communication. Not by abandoning family relationships, but by restructuring them. Not by choosing between love and achievement, but by demanding that love support achievement, rather than suppress it. The door that slammed behind me when I was 18 opened onto a path I never could have imagined. The education I fought for became the foundation not just for personal success, but for family healing. The independence I demanded became the platform for deeper connection than we had ever achieved when connection was imposed rather than chosen. Sometimes the people who try to hold you back are the same people who will eventually be most proud of how far you've traveled. Sometimes the contracts you have to write to protect yourself become the foundations for relationships that are stronger than anything built on obligation alone. Your situation might require different strategies, your family dynamics might need different solutions, your dreams might lead you down completely different paths. But the principle remains constant: never let someone else's fear determine the boundaries of your potential, and never assume that love requires you to make yourself smaller to make others comfortable. The most powerful thing you can do for people you care about is become the fullest version of yourself and then share the benefits of that achievement with them. Not because you owe them anything, but because you choose to. Not because they deserve it, but because love is a choice you make every day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.